In one of the worlds there were wars going on between kingdoms. The guy was watching a huge army heading in his direction. He said with a snide smile that there were only 2,000 of them, and that his kingdom was severely underestimated. Behind him was not a small army either. He asked them what they had to say to that, explaining that they would find out today what they were capable of. With a single gesture of his hand, he directed his army into battle with words of what they had to show them. The crowd behind him began to cheer and support their commander-in-chief. Tactics Chronicle is a 4th-generation virtual reality game, RPG with elements of kingdom management. The game became rapidly popular, as it stood out very much against the background of other monotonous games. In addition, the game qualitatively conveyed the setting of the fantasy world. When he first entered the game, in front of his eyes was a vast steppe. The next thing he felt was a light breeze and the smell of grass. He clenched his fist and was all glowing with excitement to try out this game. The boy rushed forward shouting that this was where their adventure would begin, and also said that he would create his kingdom. After some time in finding this game, he erected a huge kingdom. A dragon flew over the buildings. It showed its warlike roar, paying tribute to its king. All the knights gathered around began to form a single row. In an instant, they greeted the king with glee. The ruler of the kingdom of Archimaira stood on the balcony. He looked on with a smile as his subjects cheered. After much adversity, Archimaira had become the strongest kingdom in the world. It was time to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom. All the knights and subjects listened to him attentively. Player Tsukasa Miki. He talked about how, as expected in this game, they were all monsters. The results of his efforts were really noticeable. It was amazing on his part. However, he wondered about what that particular ogre was thinking. It could only be obtained during a national holiday. So he thought he would be strong enough and put him in charge of the squad, and he took it and died, something the guy was very disappointed about. Miki remembered that the girl should be here by now and started counting down the timer. There was a knock on the door to which he said she could come in. A girl walked into the dairy, looking more like a white wolf. She called him Mr. Hellion, explaining that she was reporting on the preparations for the kingdom's founding celebration, which was over, and asked him to come on stage. The guy nodded and said she had done a good job, explaining that he was ready to go on stage. The game used keywords, a system that allowed players to interact and communicate with NPCs in Tactics Chronicle. The girl said she obeyed him and opened the door to the exit, inviting him through, to which the guy thanked her, calling her by her name Reeve with a glare. Reeve was one of the 3 monsters that had fallen to him from the gacha when he first started playing. First, she was just a small beast man from a rare wolf family. The second was a low-ranked cat demon that fell out to him, and the third was a white fairy. However, they were now the commanders of the kingdom's 2nd and 3rd corps. Thanks to them and the other monsters he had summoned, his kingdom had become the strongest, the 8 great army corps of the Archimaira kingdom. He had patiently cared for her all these few years, and she had grown into a first-class monster. It was already the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom in the game, something he was getting sentimental about at the moment, and wiped away the tears that came to his eyes. Miki began to think about what he could say this year. However, whatever he said, the game effect would not change. No one forced him to play a role. He looked up and realized that something was wrong here. Miki and Reeve began to feel as if they were falling under the ground. They didn't realize what was happening. As they fell to the floor, the guy asked himself what it was, assuming it was a bug since it didn't seem like a natural disaster event. Reeve immediately asked how the Lord was feeling and if he was hurt. Miki said he was fine and she could take it easy. He didn't understand why right now he had absolutely nothing loading. The NPCs immediately reacted to what was happening, meaning it wasn't some bug. Perhaps it was all a natural disaster. Judging from what was happening, it could be an earthquake. Depending on the epicenter, the destruction could be huge. It would take a long time to rebuild, and the happiness of the citizens would drop. It was a nasty event. In a moment, he noticed something from outside. Miki didn't realize what had happened, noticing that the terrain around the capital had changed, since he remembered the surrounding area was a single step. He looked around the city and realized that it was intact and did not observe any craters. He realized that it was definitely not a natural disaster, neither an earthquake nor a meteorite fall. Since the terrain hadn't changed, it could have been a mass spell. However, the 3rd and 4th corps are in the capital. Miki said they should go back to the headquarters and asked them to follow him. They walked into the building and into his office. There was a glass orb on the desk. He held out his hand to it and mouthed that he needed to contact the nearest commander. The orb didn't give any answers. He didn't understand why he didn't have access, so he asked it to open a map of the area. A map of his kingdom appeared in front of him. He realized he couldn't see anything. He he saw that the entire area except for the capital was covered in the fog of war. Miki assumed that his kingdom had been forcibly moved, also thinking about the fact that they had fallen into undeveloped lands. Forced relocation was one of the rare and bad events, but this was the first time he had heard of an entire capital being relocated, and wondered if it was possible. But he realized that it was all nonsense. Only the administration could do such a thing. It was certainly an unfair act, as the developers have a very bad reputation. Therefore, he could not say with certainty that they were not capable of it. Reeve turned to Hellion. Miki looked at her and realized that she was under the effect of fear. It was very strange since Reeve had a passive bravery ability. It looked like the event was definitely not going to be easy. The guy told her that their kingdom capital had been forcibly moved. It was necessary to understand the current state of the kingdom first. He said that he would give basic instructions to all the corps and asked her to contact the commander of each corps and gather information to understand the current situation. The girl put her hand to her heart and said she would do his bidding with a slightly confused voice. The guy swiped his hand and displayed the command screen and opened the tactical overview. Now he had to give instructions to each corps. Miki spoke into the voice chat for the commanders of all 8 corps to hear his order. He said to suspend the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom due to the emergency, and asked them to follow his instructions. He said the first corps would be his aide-de-camp as usual. The second corps will be in charge of maintaining public safety. The third corps will assist the wounded and also check the barrier along the outer wall. The fourth corps will use scouting magic to explore the area around the city. The fifth corps is supporting the second corps with all its might and assisting in damaged houses. The sixth corps gathers information inside and outside the walls in cooperation with the fourth corps. The 7th Corps makes repairs to damaged facilities. The 8th Corps controls and guards the capital. However, no corps should engage in battle with other kingdoms. The first thing to do was to find out what was going on in their kingdom and assemble their corps. Miki had done his best. Now the only thing left to do was to wait for the report to appear. No one would have thought that such a thing could happen on the day of the kingdom's founding celebration. He realized how terrible the event was and even decided to file a complaint against the developers. There were always people who were unhappy with new updates and games. The celebration was already disrupted anyway, and thought it was a good idea to get to know his neighbors. Looking around at everyone in the game, he was surprised to see that all the players except him were offline. At the point someone knocked on the door, the guy keyworded permission to enter. It was Reeve, who came to report the results. Miki asked about any problems that might have occurred, to which the girl said that they had never encountered anything like this before, so they were a bit confused, and went directly to the report itself. Firstly, their capital city was surrounded by a dense forest. According to the 6th Corps information, this forest had a magical feature, and would not allow further magical exploration straight from the capital. The guy thought about what she said and decided to send the 4th Corps to scout there, to which the girl said that the commander of the 4th Corps had already gone there himself. He said that given the forest around them, he asked her to organize a group of elves and send them out to scout. The girl nodded to him in response. Miki wondered if that would be enough. Reeve said she understood him and would relay instructions to the commander of the 4th Corps. Next, the 8th Corps was scouting from the air. According to their reconnaissance results, only the end of the forest could be seen in the northeast. However, the reconnaissance was conducted within the boundaries of the capital. It was impossible to confirm. The guy looked at his assistant in surprise and didn't understand anything. In addition, the dragons had asked to be allowed to fly higher or to fly outside the borders of the capital, but she put him in his place and gave him a good punch. She explained to him that the king's orders were not to engage or provoke the other kingdoms into battle. The next part of the report, she explained that regarding internal security, they had so far managed to keep the population calm. However, the recently joined ogres, but before she could finish she was interrupted by Miki. He looked at her and didn't realize where he used keywords. She asked him what the keywords meant. He started to say that he was talking to himself. With shock he asked about her reaction to his words. She nodded and apologized, asking about the fact that wasn't that an order. The guy started to say that it was all wrong and it was impossible that NPCs reacted to phrases without keywords. Reeve asked about what else he might have been reasoning and apologized for interrupting his musings. He looked at the girl with shock and couldn't understand how it had happened. The guy realized that he urgently needed to contact his friend, but he could not do it. No matter where he pressed, there was no reaction. He mumbled to himself that he needed to calm down and pull himself together. The girl started to worry about him and asked him if he was okay, also asking if he was sick as he was pale. She moved closer to his face and apologized. Miki ran his hand over her cheek and realized that it was impossible. He came to a kind of shock. Of course, the all-senses projection system is capable of transmitting all 5 senses, such as the sensation of touch. However, it was still an artificial sense. He wondered about why he could feel her breath, and why her skin naturally blushed. Such a sweet and pleasant fragrance of a young girl emanated from her. The girl timidly turned to him with incomprehension. The guy didn't understand what their explanations were for what was happening. Only 3 things came to mind. The most logical was the new major update of this game. It raised the artificial intelligence, and all 5 senses feel so that it is unrealistic to distinguish from reality. The girl asked him if he was okay, wondering also what had happened. The second option was that it's all a quality prank, and there's a very high quality cosplay of Reeve in front of him right now. In other words, it's a super scale prank from the administration. And also the third option was a theme very popular in short stories about 5 years ago. The main character gets into the world of a manga or a game. He started thinking about getting into another world, and came to more shock at what was happening. Reeve asked him to sit down, telling him that she would call the commander of the 3rd Corps to join them. He said that he shouldn't do that, saying that he was fine and he was fine. The girl said the commander would just look him over. He ordered her to stand down and continue gathering information. She said she listened to him and asked him not to overexert himself. The guy tried to catch his breath. He needed to get out by pressing the emergency exit button. Access was denied. He put his head on the table and said he couldn't make it. His excitement he felt when he first entered this game. He could still feel it. This was where their adventure began. Those words he had shouted then, it seems now the words given had taken on a new meaning. His name is Tsukasa Miki, and he is Hellion, ruler of the kingdom of Archimaira. And in this new world he will gather an invincible army. By being the only human, he became the weakest king. Tactics Chronicle is a new generation SLRPG in a fantasy world. Therefore, it has many features that make it different from other games. In this game, the king himself is incapable of fighting. The physical abilities of the player are the same as the average person in the real world. In addition, it is impossible to become stronger. In short, only his subordinates are strong in this game. The ruler himself is basically the weakest being in the world. Reeve bowed her head in front of Hellion, saying that by the king's order all the corps commanders had arrived to him. He asked them to raise their heads and thanked them for coming to him. Some of them he hadn't seen in a while, but having said that there was no time to waste, he had to get down to business. Miki wondered if it would be okay if he spoke to them in an orderly tone. However, he had to prove himself a worthy king. He asked Baron to report on the current situation in the country after the incident. The latter nodded to him in response. The commander of the 2nd Corps Lion Sword Baron. He explained that there were no security problems inside the kingdom. The townspeople were gradually calming down. There were also only a few people injured in the incident. Baron was the commander of the Beast Knights. He possessed the unique skill of Knight Spirit. In addition, he also had the discipline skill. If anyone could be trusted to maintain internal security, it was him. Miki thanked him for his excellent work, explaining that now it was Iltina's turn. The commander of the 3rd Ancient Elf Corps is Iltina. She nodded, saying that she would start from the beginning. Firstly, the 3rd Corps had assisted all the injured townspeople. Secondly, while inspecting the outer barrier they noticed something. The road that ran from the main gate was gone. In addition, everything outside the wall was covered in thick forests. However, he noticed that not only Reeve but also other NPCs had gained so-called consciousness. Iltina is the head of the Holy Spirit Order that specializes in healing and support. Her unique skills, mercy, and teamwork. And the elegance skill emphasized her big sister character and her exquisite beauty. The girl continued, saying that the forest was magical and didn't allow exploration with magic. At least she wasn't capable of it. He nodded and said that let them assume that no one knows that their country is here. Then their main task is to explore the world around them as soon as possible without revealing the existence of their kingdom. He also asked them to continue their exploration and try not to reveal themselves. He ordered to proceed cautiously. Luckily, none of them objected. It was almost as if they didn't think it was a cowardly move. The guy asked Reeve about how even their elite mages from the 4th Corps couldn't handle forest magic. The girl said that was true. The 4th Corps commander's report said that it was some type of magic previously unknown to them, so it needed time. The commander of the 1st squad is Moonwolf Reeve. She is the commander of the closest squad to him, the Guard. Its main task is to directly assist the king. Her unique skill is bravery. Besides, she is at the head of all 8 corps. But she said it's better to try brute force. They suggested to wipe out this forest with the magic of all the members of the 4th Corps, and that would be the end of it. Miki said he forbade them to do that. They might disturb forces unknown to them. Most likely their existence was already known, but they shouldn't rush into it until they had no margin for error. Reeve said that she knew he would say that, so she clarified for her to know her place, since Hellion had forbidden brute force. The boy nodded at her in response to that. He watched her face and realized that she was holding herself with dignity as always. However, her ponytail was giving her away with her guts, but he could tell her thoughts by it. Miki thanked her for a job well done. The girl bowed to him. He doesn't just socialize with his subordinates. After all, there was another thing in this game, the rebellion system. After what happened, the happiness level was still low, which would cause loyalty to drop, and if that happened, a rebellion could break out. There are only strong monsters around him, and he is such a fragile and weak person, who couldn't help himself. He should have stopped thinking about such a thing. He said that if they wanted to do reconnaissance without the risk of provoking other countries, they would have to do it on their own without magic. Thus he said to have the 6th Corps do the reconnaissance, to which the girl stood up and said that they would do their best. The commander of the 6th Corps was Nightmare Empress Camille. However, as far as exploring the forest was concerned, they had a bit of a problem. He marveled as he looked at her. The 6th Corps led by Camille was established during the Cold War with other kingdoms. In the field of information gathering, they were unrivaled. The girl bowed her head and said that she was sorry, for she was afraid that she might not be able to handle it. Everyone from their squad, including her, had never worked in previously unexplored territory, so she was afraid that they might not have been able to handle it. In a moment he realized his mistake, for indeed, they were specialists in gathering information for information warfare. Land reconnaissance was something else entirely. They specialized in gathering information in the enemy camp. Reconnaissance of unexplored territories was not their specialty. The girl said that if there were no more suitable people, the 6th Corps would take it on. To which Hellion said he understood her concern and was fine with the comments, also thanking her for bringing it up. Camille thanked him for that. He began to tell himself to act like a king, and one must keep a cool head while doing so. He suggested to do otherwise. The commanders of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps turned to them. He asked about if they remembered how to scout the new territory. They nodded to him in response. Guy decides to send a small group of elite soldiers so they are sure to survive in uncharted lands. Depending on the results, they will decide what to do next. Miki leaves the internal security to Baron, while Reeve and Altina will handle the exploration. The boy explained about the fact that enough time had passed and that was why they had grown stronger. He had no doubt that they could handle it. Raising morale before an important task was perhaps one of the king's main duties. They had nothing to worry about. The only difference from their first scouting assignment, Baron would not be with them. The girls looked at him in surprise. He said that the 6th Corps was continuing to gather information inside the capital. Reeve and Altina had to get ready as the departure from the North Gate would be in 10 minutes. The girls accepted his orders. It seemed to him that they tensed up more, assuming he had said something wrong, saying that they would end the audience at this point and asked him to tell the rest of the commanders, have them continue with their duties. He looked around at his commanders. Their looks were quite serious. There was nothing that could be done, as what had been said could not be taken back. He had no choice but to accept the situation for now. Camille sighed and said that she was still not satisfied and wanted to talk to him under different circumstances. Baron told her that she was being unworthy. She indignantly said that she would look at him if he were in her shoes. She explained that they first clearly had the upper hand, and she hadn't had an audience with him in 3 years, to which the commander told her to get over it and their dirty habits, and habits wouldn't give them a chance. Not everyone was worthy of being close to the king of the capital, but they, the 3 who have been with him from the very beginning, are more worthy of it than anyone. The girl grinned and asked not to lie to herself, since the king was a man so might not have noticed. For example, Reeve's hobby did not turn his tongue to call worthy. Altina was also suspicious. The girl smiled and asked what she wanted to say. Camilla turned her attention to her, to which the girl asked if she would explain it to her or not. The girl said with a calm smile that it was no big deal. She walked over to her and told her to sit down. Camille looked surprised at her, to which the girl told her that she was now ready to talk, asking why she called her suspicious. She explained that she just wanted to make a point about the king liking girls. Altina said that she had chosen a rather strange way of saying it. Altina suggested that she was implying that she liked their lord, but she actually liked girls. Camilla said she called that not normal, to which the one objected that there was nothing like that and strange or suspicious about it. She had once seen His Majesty muttering to himself as well. She looked at Altina in surprise. If Hellion was there, he would surely be trying to avoid the topic at hand. Besides, there was something so precious about the girl's face when she was about to cry, for there was nothing in this world cuter than a girl about to cry. Camille turned to the ram, but noticed that he turned away from her and asked her not to ignore her. He asked Reeve what was bothering her since she was kind of quiet today. She said that the whole story was keeping her on her toes. The way their master spoke, they looked at each other with serious faces. Altina spoke of how she had noticed it too. Camilla explained that since she wasn't the only one to notice it, it certainly wasn't her imagination. She would keep an eye on the situation in the capital in that case, asking if Reeve would be against it, to which the girl said she would allow her to do so. The girl also asked Altina if she would listen to her, to which the girl nodded and asked what had happened. She explained that in truth, the whole situation with the forced transfer of the capital had thrown her into a state of confusion. She was worried about Mr. Hellion's safety, that she was prying into him unnecessarily, and she felt like she ended up scaring him. But whatever adversity their lord faced, he would deal with it. After all, he is the ruler of the strongest kingdom of Archimaira. Thus they will be his pawns, as they always have been. They must work together to pave the way for their kingdom and their king. Altina said she didn't think worrying about his majesty was wrong. Reeve said she had no one else to share it with and apologized to her. She asked not to take it personally, that was part of her job too. Miki wondered about what he had said wrong. He was going to act like a decent king and already he had managed to make a mistake. He was getting the impression that it was only going to get worse from here. He also wanted to pretend that he was a confident king so they wouldn't think he was worried. But there was nothing more to be done. The most important thing was to go see Reeve and Altina off. It was enough to sit idle. He needed to go there and observe with all his eyes and hear everything with his ears. That was what his instructor had taught him. In his opinion, it was necessary if he was to be in charge of others. But there was no way he expected that he could become such a big shot in his 20s. In a moment, something caught his attention. The doors opened in front of him and in walked the knights, the assembled soldiers who were going on a scouting mission. He wondered in surprise at what this was all about. After all, no matter how many commanders were sent on a mission, this was, in his opinion, too much. The two girls approached the king. They bowed their heads to him and said they were ready. Altina said the servants would take care of his cloak. His cloak was removed from behind him. His sword appeared in its scabbard. He didn't realize what was happening at the moment. Reeve spoke of whatever lay ahead of them. She would protect him. Altina explained that she was ready to go and would do whatever she could for him and their kingdom. He still didn't understand what was going on or why he was being changed into his expedition armor. The guy was dressed in the armor and he thought about how it was as if he was going on a mission himself. He remembered what he had told them earlier, that Baron would not be with them. He was the first to do the first recon with them, but he was also included in the recon team. Baron ordered the swords to be raised. Everyone shouted the king's greeting in one voice. His Majesty himself would go at the head of the scouting group. The boy looked at Reeve and realized that a lot of time had passed since he last went scouting. Therefore, he didn't even think about what he said. He hated his stupidity. Also his tongue was boneless. He ordered Reeve and Altina to move out. However, why was it like this? Wondering that maybe he had done something wrong. Also, what kingdom ever sent their king to scout, and asked to himself for someone to stop it before it was too late? As they walked through the dense forest, the boy didn't understand what was wrong with him. They had been walking for an hour, and the surroundings didn't change at all. The same trees were around, and because of this magical effect, they were losing their sense of distance. In a moment, a strange sound was heard ahead of them. They noticed that this forest had become completely normal. Altina noticed that the magical effect of the illusion was suddenly gone. The guy looking around the area assumed that they might have gotten out of the radius. From the point they were at, there was an ordinary forest. Reeve's attention, something caught their attention from behind them. She shouted out that something was approaching them from behind. A huge monster in the form of an angry wolf stood in front of them. It galloped at them and stared without averting its gaze. Miki assumed it was a werewolf over 5 meters. It was also quite hostile. This was exactly what their first contact with the local fauna had been like. Reeve really tensed up, looking it straight in the eye. In a moment, the creature howled a loud howl. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared behind the trees. The girl said it seemed he understood, as he was no match for her, saying that he was a weak bug, and would die in vain if he engaged her in battle. The guy understood, as that was to be expected from the beast man Moon Wolf Reeve. She was his direct assistant for a reason. Her strength was enough to call him a weak bug. Thinking about it well, she was Reeve's first subordinate. Naturally, she would be stronger than some stray werewolf. Altina turned to Hellion, saying something was heading northeast. He looked at her questioningly. He opened the tactical interface in front of him, then opened the map to check what it was. Since Altina had alerted him, the information exchange worked. The color of the dots on the map was white. Therefore, it was not known who it could be, either allies or enemies. Miki explained that there were two of them. It looked like the one behind was clearly stalking. Altina explained that they were moving together, but not in their direction. In addition, from the distance, she heard a faint scream from the person being chased. The boy said that they should move faster to help the person who was screaming for help. The small girl was being chased by a wolf-like creature, which the guys had already met on their way. It was like a huge dog with magical symbols on its body. It did not slow down and ran after the girl, barking and growling. The guys from upstairs saw them running, to which Miki ordered Altina to stop the demonic beast. The girl nodded back at him and recited a spell to make the wind slash like a sharp blade and cast Wind Blade. In a moment, sharp blades of wind were directed at the beast, and in a quick instant, they began to attack it. In the blink of an eye, the beast shattered into small pieces. The guy was surprised by this attack of Altina. However, judging from the number of pieces, it was a low-level magic but with a high rate of fire and low cast speed. Miki began to look at the creature, or rather what was left of it. It wasn't moving, which meant that it was definitively dead. He assumed it was advanced wind magic. A girl sat between the trees and noticed the magic being used without a catalyst. The guy noticed her and was surprised that it was a girl. He explained that it was good that they made it in time and asked if she was hurt. She took off her hood and looked at the nag with a serious look. He was surprised that it was an elf. Putting her thing back on, she thanked them for saving her. However, she still tried to be careful. The boy smiled and said he shouldn't be. They happened to hear a scream as they passed by. But either way, he was glad that they made it in time. The girl asked in surprise about what they were passing by and turned her attention to the elf Altina and the beast man Reeve. The girls gave their names and said they were very pleased to meet her. However, even though he was in the game at the moment, in the real world his communication skills left much to be desired. He figured it was best to leave all communication to Altina. The girl apologized and said that she and Reeve weren't really good at socializing with people and pushed the guy forward slightly, to which Reeve clarified that she was right and it was better to refrain from talking. Miki realized that he was in trouble because he wanted to take it out on Altina, but for some reason he still felt like he had been stabbed in the back. However, he would have to do the talking in that case. The girl turned to Reeve and Altina asking about them being his slaves. They all looked at her in surprise. She started to ask if she was right and why they were all silent. Miki objected and said that she wasn't. After all, they were just traveling with him and they didn't have that kind of relationship. The girl bowed her head and asked what they saved the half-elf for. He asked in surprise about her being half-elf and half-human. She lowered her robe and showed her ears. She confirmed what she said about being half-elf and asked about the fact that they probably regretted saving her now. The guy looked at her with incomprehension and asked why he thought so. The girl didn't immediately understand him, to which he asked why he should be sorry just because she was half-elf. She couldn't string together a normal sentence out of surprise and said that they helped her because they mistook her for an elf. The guy thought about her words and asked what she meant to say about there being any problems with her being half-elf. A question was heard behind their backs about how he didn't know that. Everyone turned to the person in question in a moment. Behind their back stood a tall guy. Wearing elite armor, he explained that she was from a corrupted race. In his hands he held the head of the beast they had killed. He spoke of the fact that they were unfamiliar faces, explaining that they weren't so simple and couldn't believe that his dog had been killed so easily like that. Miki clarified that it was a hound and it was specifically his. The man looked at him with a serious look and asked about being human. The elf explained that they were so close to the endless forest. He didn't expect to see a human here. The guy asked about the forest and said that it didn't matter, it was much more important at the moment. Miki asked about the corrupted race, to which the man smiled evasively and remarked that he really didn't know about it. He explained that she was a half-breed, she was not like them. The noble ones were elves, loved by the gods and spirits. The girl was the fruit of a foul love between an elf and an impure human, who can only breed like cockroaches. Therefore, she is from a tainted race. The half-elf girl started shouting that it wasn't true when they weren't a tainted race. The man in question was clearly not friendly. He started yelling for her to shut up, as he heard only her voice. It was as if his ears had been pooped on, and told her not to dare open her disgusting mouth, calling her a filthy half-breed. At first glance a handsome elf, but that look of disgust on his face, not much different from a human, just as ugly. But that wasn't what was worth thinking about right now. There was not a single unit of the human race in this game, it was solely a race of rulers. However, there were many humanoid races such as elves and dwarves. There were no humans in the game except for the player. His words were already going against the game's setting. There was no point in thinking about it at that moment. The main thing was to gather information. The guy decided to ask about what he was chasing her for, to which he replied, to have fun with her. The elf said that there were so many of those vermin breeding in that city, like real rats. That was why he used her to train his hounds. Everywhere you looked there were half-breeds. He asked him to imagine that they had founded a small town and they had the nerve to call that backwater a country. Raising his hand with a sort of glow, he explained that as a pureblood elf, he would make the most of this town for himself. In this way he would rid himself of the foul blood. He said that he should understand him, calling the ignorant man an ignorant man of his. He spoke a great deal for one who was in the minority. The boy wondered how confident the man was in his abilities. He stood in front of the half-breed and covered her with his back. Miki apologized, saying that they were travelers and had never been to this part of the country, and they would hate to appear ignorant. Toph smiled wryly and assumed that Miki was admitting his ignorance. He thought everyone owed the same. However, it turned out that they had him as an unusual monkey. However, he said it was too late to beg for forgiveness. After all, he was a monkey and had also interfered with his hunting, so he must pay for his sins. His face filled with rage, and a glow began to appear in his hand more and more. The half-elf shouted for him to stop saying such things. After all, he was a human and not a monkey. She pleaded for them to be left alone, as they just lived on the edge of the forest and not bothering anyone in the process. Plus there were deserts nearby from the endless forests. She screamed at the top of her voice about how they were trying their best to somehow survive in this world, but wondered why people like him were bullying them. The elite elf shouted for her to shut her mouth, as he had already said that her voice made him feel like he had shit in his ears. Shouting a spell, Storm Arrow, he said that he himself could silence her forever, and in the blink of an eye his hound dogs headed in her direction as well. The guy stood in front of the girl and questioned himself about what he was doing for the moment, assuming he was about to die. He could feel how strong the wind current was, and the roaring sound was making his eardrums about to pop. He didn't understand why he did it and realized his end was about to come. But in a moment the elf's attack was repelled by a shield that appeared around them. Altina and Reeve protected them. The girl also cast a spell, the Entangling Vine. In a moment this elf was enveloped by a relic of roots so that he could not move. He ordered his hounds to devour them all, to which Reeve dealt with the beasts very deftly. All this time Reeve and Altina understood the importance of first contact. That's why they had to endure when the arrogant elf insulted their lord, because gathering information was more important. Altina hid her dislike and disgust behind a smile, and Reeve fought hard to suppress the urge not to leave a wet spot from him and other reckless actions. However, if he attacked first, that was a different conversation altogether. Someone shouted words for them to stop. It was Miki. He asked her to stop. He stopped her just in time, for her fist with a sharp knuckle was already closed to this elf's face. The elf was trying to get out of the vine that bound him. He couldn't understand how or when it happened, to which the guy only called out to him. He raised his hand and said that they would spare him, as there was no need for them to shed blood. After all, he had forced them into such an act, so they had to cool his ardor. The guy looked at him furiously and didn't understand. Miki repeated that they would spare him and he would then disappear from here. The elf started talking about how he dared a man like him to open his disgusting mouth at him. It was not allowed. He said that he was many times better than him. After all, he was the chief of the noble elves. The boy said he didn't care who he was and repeated again to make the man disappear from his sight, or he could check how serious he was. The branches of the vine loosened their grip and let go of this elf. He left without a word, only looking at them scornfully. The boys escorted him with a look into the thicket of the forest. It was quite dangerous. They could kill the representative of the other side. You couldn't start a war without knowing anything about the enemy. It was really dangerous. The half-elf turned to the guy and thanked them for saving her. He looked at her and timidly said that she was glad she was unharmed. He realized the moment that he had accidentally revealed to her that he was Reeve and Altina's superior. This was ruining his image as a normal traveler. Miki corrected himself and said that they were actually his loyal companions, also explaining that he's just pathetic and unsure of his own abilities, so he's his hands off without them. The half-elf girl only laughed at his words. The guys didn't understand why she started to burst into laughter. The girl apologized and said that such a strong elf could be defeated by such a humble person. It was even funny somehow that she half-elf had problems. She smilingly apologized again, saying that she just couldn't help herself and there was no need for him to belittle himself like that in front of her. The boy didn't know what to say to her. The girl introduced herself by the name of Raef and thanked him again for his help. Miki explained that they were just trying to calm him down and there was nothing to thank them for. Reeve bowed and said that since they had saved her after all, she asked that her thanks be accepted. She was also very uncomfortable and decided to ask him for something. The guy looked at her in surprise and asked what was wrong. She, with a smile on her face, asked him what his name was. The guy was puzzled for a couple seconds and with a smile introduced himself as Hellion. The girl said she was very pleased to meet him. They shook hands. They set off down the road through the forest. He decided to clarify what kind of elf this was. She explained that their town had been attacked by elves from Noblewood. The name of their kingdom was Latestwood. However, kingdom was a mouthful, more like a city-state. Also, their city could be called a community. 30 years ago, Latestwood was founded by a common half-elf. The boy was surprised to note that 30 years, that wasn't that long ago. Raef explained that the half-elf race was relatively recent. Their numbers had increased dramatically 100 years ago. Until then, they could be called a rare race. 100 years ago, the war with humans began. The elves won the first battle due to their magical skills, but the humans were much bigger and they crushed them in numbers, so the elves started to suffer defeat after defeat. The humans at that time began to brutally exterminate the elves, and they had to retreat into the great forests. In that forest they founded a strong state, and after 5 years from the beginning of the war, a peace treaty was signed by both sides. But there was still one thing, she asked them a question about what happened to the elven women who were captured by the humans. Altina bowed her head sadly. The elven girls were very beautiful, so they became human slaves. They were given to aristocrats and high-ranking military personnel. They were also treated like girls of light behavior, making them their slaves. After the peace treaty was signed, most of the elven women were returned to their homeland. But many were already pregnant and ended up having children conceived by humans. These were her ancestors, though she called them that. She was only the 4th generation of half-breeds. The elves did not want to recognize the half-breeds, which was logical because they hated humans. They, the half-breeds, had become an object of disgust and abuse. And now, for the moment, they hated them even more than they hated humans. Hellion asked about what the humans thought of them. She explained that they disliked them too, but still better than the elves. There weren't any elves that treated them well, but some of the humans that stopped by them in the forest were very friendly to them. Reeve remembered with a smile how one had even rushed to her rescue, also saying that the world was not without good people. The boy thought about it and began to realize that there was no such story in the game. However, the race of elves did exist, and there was no such war in the story itself 100 years ago. Guy clarified that the elves from Noblewood could not stand the half-elves from Latestwood. She nodded and clarified that they want a quiet life just. However, their town is very close to human territory, so the elves want to use them as a human shield in case of war with humans. But because they are close to the magic forest, they have not been touched by anyone. However, 3 weeks ago, Noblewood's army suddenly started attacking. He asked her why they decided to attack, to which Reifa said she didn't know. They claimed to be of noble blood and had come by right to rule in the city. She would not accept that in her life. Hellion assumed that they wanted to take over these lands to be closer to the humans. In that case, it was possible that they would have a chance in a war against the humans. The girl said that she didn't know that and it was all too complicated for her. Perhaps they wanted to become a great power again like 100 years ago, and they also wanted to use the city as a strategic base. However, if they just wanted to occupy the city, then why did they need to chase the fleeing people? Hellion said that it was a fact that they attacked without a declaration of war. He decided to also find out who exactly ruled the city. Reifa explained that they have a matriarchal kingdom and the city was ruled by a woman, since Queen Latestwood and Prince Consort were missing. They are not as good at magic or as strong as the elves, so she hoped she was alive. After all, she was the one who united them and founded the country. The girl assumed that she was most likely captured by the elves. The city had been sacked, the ruler was gone. It was a complete defeat for them. Hellion began to think about what could be done in such a situation, and the first thing to do was to retreat and then team up with someone and try to fight back altogether. However, the half-elves were not only discriminated against by the elves but also by the humans as well. So they got together to form their own kingdom, because they simply had no one to turn to. The girl asked if they could wait for a while, to which the guy nodded and said no problem. She said that they had about 10 minutes to walk to the town, but the residents might get scared when they saw them. So she wanted to warn them so there would be no confusion, to which Hellion said that was a good idea. Altina stood in front of Hellion warily and told him to be careful just in case, as a magic circle appeared in front of them, which was summoned by Raef. The girl spoke what she was summoning and asked to hear her, speaking of her friend and comrade. The boy realized that it was similar to summoning magic, but he had never heard this kind of spell reading before. He didn't know how elven magic was used here. The more information they gathered, the better. Reifa continued to read the spell, asking him to accept her as his and for him to hear her ringing voice. She cast the spell Call of the Ally. A tall elven woman appeared before them, carrying a bow and wearing leather armor. She looked at her in surprise and shouted if she was all right. In a moment she pointed her bow at Hellion and his partners. Reeve addressed her by the name Venri and asked her to stop, saying they were travelers and they saved her from death. Venri said there was a human and a beast-like girl there besides the elf. She ordered her to put her bow down now, to which the girl looked at her with incomprehension and lowered her bow. The guy realized that she had summoned a half-breed older than her. He was also surprised that she called her mistress. Reeve apologized to them, explaining that they had been on pins and needles lately and asked them to forgive Venri and her behavior. The boy decided to clarify if he could ask her something, to which she nodded and he asked her for her full name. She smiled and said that her full name was Leifa latestwood. She also mentioned that it would be a bit longer before they reached her kingdom. The girl said that there she would be able to greet them as a member of the royal family. Leifa said that if they walked a little farther, they would reach her village. The boys nodded and set off along the road through the forest. Half-elf guards stood in the trees and watched them vigilantly. The boy looked around. In one of the trees a child half-elf explained that Lady Leifa had brought someone in at such a difficult time for them, implying that they had enough elves attacking as it was. Venri said that they had saved Mistress, but however she didn't understand anything. She also couldn't imagine what was going on in her head. They began to pass farther and farther away, and already under the crowns of the trees small houses appeared. There were also some tents on the ground. The small village called Lastwood was quite lively. Leifa began to ask people to listen to her and pointed at the boys, saying that they had saved her. She also explained that if they were rude to them, it was also the same insult if it was her who was being insulted. They began to be discussed in the neighborhood, asking about them being warrior travelers. However, they noticed that there was an elf and a human among them. They had never seen humans look like this, with black hair and dark eyes. Hellion began to feel like an animal in a zoo. Leifa latestwood. She was the queen's first daughter. In other words, the first princess and heir to the throne. It was only unknown if the current queen was still alive. It seemed that Leifa was able to unite the people under her. She also had a younger sister. With the exception of her parents whose fate was unknown, only the two of them were left of the royal family. However, he had another question. Why was she such an important person in the middle of the forest being chased? The guys went inside the building and Hellion asked about saving the current queen. The girl confirmed it and said she didn't understand. The elves didn't kill them, they only took them captive and they are also trying to take them alive. Therefore, there was a possibility that her mother, the current queen, was still alive. She was trying to sneak in with an elite unit and rescue her. He decided to clarify why she was all alone and without an elite squad. She told him that they were discovered by the enemy before they could get over the city wall. Unfortunately, there was no way to save them. She could barely get her legs away. The others had been caught, trying to give her an opportunity for a retreat. The boy lowered his head, saying he understood her. Venri shouted that he was asking her mistress too many questions, clarifying if that was too rude of him. She explained that she was grateful to him from the bottom of her heart that he had saved her mistress, but there was one nuance. She asked about the fact that he was a traveler, but why he did not understand at all what was happening in this part of the world, to which she decided to also clarify whether he was not hiding anything else. Everyone became wary after her words. The guy gave a hand signal to Reeve not to do anything and said that he understood her feelings perfectly. He also explained that they wanted to be sure whether they were definitely not working together with the Alez or not, to which the girl said that she had said no such thing. The guy said with a smile that they were indeed not travelers. However, they were still not the most ordinary people either. The girl came to a shock, asking what he meant. He told her that they came from the Abyss Forest. Everyone there was shocked at what they heard, to which Venri decided to ask, assuming they were minions of the Demon King. Hellion was embarrassed and said that he didn't know and had first heard that there was a Demon King in the Abyss Forest. Based on Leifa's words, they call the magical forest the Forest of Abyss. Judging from their reaction, it was a dangerous and troublesome place. The guy told how it was. They were exploring the old castle, when suddenly they were thrown into this forest. They wandered around this forest for about 5 days. He also asked about whether they now understood why he was unfamiliar with the situation. Venri was surprised that they had been in the forest for 5 days without supplies and necessary equipment. Hellion smiled and asked Reeve and Eltina to show them everything. Various gear and supplies appeared from small bags. Everyone was shocked at what they pulled out of their pouches, as it was impossible to put such a thing in there. The girls showed some of the stuff and said they had managed to find it while exploring the ruins. Hellion remarked that he didn't fully understand, But yet these bags allowed them to store a huge amount of stuff despite their small volume. Everyone marveled at how they had managed to survive. The bag in question was called the Magic Purse. Its ability to store a huge amount of things inside. In the game it was the most common thing, but due to its peculiarity it was considered more valuable and useful. Its performance would avoid further suspicion. This was the plan that came to his mind. He knew they didn't trust him yet. It was suspicious to them that he had spent so much time in the forest without equipment. Therefore, he decided that he would show them the magic wallet to ward off any suspicion. However, when he thought about it, there were still many other factors, which could have raised suspicions, but they shouldn't have turned their attention to them because they were too engrossed in the purse in question. He thought about the fact that everything had gone very smoothly and he had succeeded in diverting their attention. A little girl appeared from behind the curtain and happily said she was coming in, calling Leifa her sister. The girl explained that she was her little sister named Lila. She asked to leave them alone, as she had a serious conversation to have here. The child only wanted to leave as in a moment she turned and called Hellion a brother, asking about the fact that he was the one who saved her sister, to which the man confusedly said that it wasn't him. He explained that her sister was saved by his comrades, named Reeve and Eltina. He was weak and therefore unable to fight. Leifa looked at him in surprise. Leifa apologized and said he would give her a preventive talk later, to which the guy tried to calm her down and told her not to worry. At the moment he felt a strange look on him, to which he turned to Lilifa and asked what was wrong. The girl looked at him with a smile and asked him if he liked big shapes on girls. Leifa asked with shock at what she was carrying and asked her to come over to her, to which the girl said Mr. Traveler is a human. She went behind Hellion's back and took him by the shoulder, telling him that he sure liked big forms. She began to pelt him with the question of whether he liked her forms, as she thought she had them quite large. Hellion nervously began to say that he wasn't really into that and explained that everything was appropriate for her age. The girl asked with a snide smile about her having bigger than her sister. Leifa again tried to stop this conversation from her sister's side. The girl exhaled and apologized for her sister's rudeness. The guy smiled and said it was fine and there was no need to apologize. In a moment before he knew it, Lilifa was already holding his hand. Thanks to her, he was able to avoid further questioning, but he was uncomfortable with the situation and decided that he needed to find something to talk about. Hellion decided to ask how old she was, to which the girl looked at him with a smile and asked how old he would give her by the looks of it and offered to look closer. Leifa asked him about his interest in her age. He realized that elves always looked younger than their years, so there were some factors to consider here. He assumed her age to be around 30, to which Lilifa said she was only 10. She explained that she was just like her mother, as she too had human blood running through her, and also everyone said she looked a lot like her. She explained that was why she had large forms like her mother. Leifa nervously asked about her getting back on track. Lilifa tried to say that Venri was calling her, to which her sister said that the girl wouldn't be able to distract her. Hellion looked ahead and said that Lilifa was definitely right, and pointed to Venri running in their direction. The girl apologized to Hellion and said that she had business to attend to. She also turned to her sister and explained that she was busy for the time being and asked her to stay with Mr. Jellian. As she left, she asked not to inconvenience Mr. Jellian and his companions. As he saw her off, the boy realized that he wanted to find out a lot more from her. He didn't understand how he was going to gather information now. He wondered if Lilifa would be useful. In a moment the girl stunned him again with another question about whether he would take her in marriage, which made him speechless. The boy began to cough, and the girl asked him if he was alright. He explained that he had just choked and asked her why she was talking about it. She asked him if he wanted to marry her. He couldn't understand why she had brought it up so abruptly. She was proposing to the first person she met. He wondered what was wrong with her. He also assumed that he was so handsome that the young princess had fallen in love with him at first sight. But that didn't even sound good and was impossible no matter which way one looked at such a thing. He was sad to say such a thing, but it was too unrealistic a scenario. Nevertheless, it was really happening at the moment. He began to feel as if it was all happening in a dream, because it was impossible to take and enter a completely different world. The boy said with confusion that he would be happy to do so, explaining that it was all a dream. The girl said that it was all a reality. Hellion said that they should have calmed down a bit to begin with. It was important to stay calm at times like this, to which Lilifa explained that it was only him who needed to calm down at the moment. The boy said that she should also think again. She didn't even know his name, especially not about the wedding. The girl decided to ask about the name of the traveler, to which he said his name was Hellion. She asked him again if he would take her as his wife, addressing him by his name. And again she began to talk about how she, like her mother, would have large forms. The girl kept on talking about big shapes without stopping. The guy began to ask what the big shapes had to do with it, as he did not understand it, to which she asked that he liked small ones. He grabbed his head and started saying to himself for someone to save him. He was also frightened by the heavy aura behind him. He wouldn't want to see the faces of his companions right now, and especially Reeve's face. Leifa explained that it was definitely a problem, as her sister was more like her father. She had more elven blood in her, hence the smaller forms. The boy interjected with what the molds had to do with it. He realized he couldn't waste any more of his time on such nonsense and asked her if she wanted to get married. He explained that he couldn't go through with such a thing without her parents' permission, and said they could talk about the wedding when her parents were saved. It was an old Japanese tradition to put off your problems. Maybe answering like that wasn't quite right, but he had plenty to do as it was, and wasting his time on children was unacceptable to him. The girl lowered her head and said that meeting her father and mother would be problematic, as they were most likely already dead. But with a smile she explained that she had a sister and that was it. Many people said they were caught, but the elves really hated their half-elves. That was why they could kill her mother. After all, she had a good shape, not like many elven women. The boy thought to himself that he was very wrong. What stood before him was not a frivolous child, but a true member of the royal family of Lastwood. A little earlier, the girl saw who came to them and turned her attention to Hellion. Pulling back the curtains, she said, coming in. She was a young and helpless princess, wondering what she could do to help her kingdom on the brink of extinction. Then along came a traveler who had the strength to save her sister. The idea immediately entered her head that she could give up her body since she was a princess. She was doing all of this to save Lastwood. He realized that she had some pretty horrible thoughts. She was willing to give up everything for her country, and he thought she was a frivolous child, which wasn't true. But even under these circumstances, he didn't know what he could do. He's a third party for not seeing the whole picture. Hellion said that there was no way he could marry her. After all, it wasn't done all that easily. Leifa nodded back at him with a smile. But in a moment he said he would be able to help them as much as he could. She turned to him and clarified if he was telling the truth, to which he nodded and said that there was nothing he could do at the moment, but he would try. The girl asked him to stop making excuses and said with a smile and a twinkle in her eyes that that alone would already be enough for her. That smile was different from her usual strained grin. It was her most sincere smile. Hellion smiled and said he would do his best, and for proof, he offered to swear on his little fingers. Leifa looked surprised and asked about having to cut off her pinky finger. The guy explained that she didn't. It was some sort of magical oath so he wouldn't break his promise. They touched pinkies and Leifa asked if the oath was concluded. Hellion looked at her with a smile and confirmed that their vow was now sealed. Many in the neighborhood wondered who Reeve was, adventurer or not. Many said that she was one of the travelers that Mistress Leifa had spoken of. Everyone watched as someone stood near a huge cauldron and cooked something, mouthing the ingredients aloud. It was Reeve. She cast an ignition spell and the soup that was in the cauldron began to boil in a moment. Many people began to smell the pleasant aroma that spread throughout the village. Leifa approached Reeve and asked if the food was ready or not. The girl explained that it was almost ready and offered to taste it. The child in a moment nestled herself into the ladle and tasted the soup a little. The girl glowed with happiness. Reeve explained that she could tell by her look that she liked the taste, and that was the most important thing. She handed her a bowl of soup. Leifa looked surprised and asked if she could take the soup. Reeve said that it was the instructions of Lord Hellion. Leifa thanked her and said her prayer, that she was grateful to the sacred tree for the grace. Everyone began to take notice as Leifa called everyone to taste the food given. Many were surprised that there was food being handed out. Someone explained with a smile that Mrs. Leifa liked it, which meant it was okay to eat. The food in question was tastier than what was prepared in the castle. The boy wondered if he should have said that, since apparently the food supply was very bad in Lastwood. The fact that they had taken in those who had fled the capital meant that there were more people in the settlement than they could feed. It was obvious that if this continued for a few more weeks, the food situation would inevitably worsen. A girl came up to him and spoke to him on behalf of all the people in the settlement. She asked him to accept thanks for the treat, to which Hellion said that he had only done what he could. He decided to mention that he had heard that the bottomless forest had tales related to the Lord of Darkness. The girl said that if one looked into the legends of the elves, one would learn that they believed that it was once the home of the Lord of Darkness. Moreover, there were quite a number of tales such as the Forest of Illusions, Other Lands, the Forbidden World of the Dead, and many others. So since ancient times, the bottomless forest has been considered a forbidden territory. However, even if there weren't these legends, among elves and half-elves, there aren't any strange ones who would want to go near the bottomless forests. Hellion asked what she meant. The girl explained that from time to time magical beasts come from the bottomless forest. Such a beast has the strength of a whole pack of magical beasts from the normal forest. It happens that sometimes entire squads are formed to fight it, but even that is rarely successful. Hellion decided to clarify what would happen if they couldn't get rid of the beast. She said that it usually rages for a while, and then returns back to the bottomless forest. For the people of the forest it was like a natural disaster. They could only hide, waiting for it to pass. He realized that it was foolish to ask why they had built a city in such a dangerous place. It looked like this piece of land was the only place the oppressed half-elves had been able to settle. Hellion asked about the other races, if there were any that were not afraid to approach the bottomless forest. Leifa explained that such people were among the humans. They were called adventurers. The boy looked at her in surprise, to which the girl said that they came to gather special resources in the bottomless forest. There were such outstanding adventurers who deliberately sought out magical beasts in the abyssal forest. Probably because abyssal beasts abounded in magical power, and many creatures became the source of special resources. Hellion asked about these adventurers coming to Lastwood of their own free will, to which Leifa said that they did, but from their point of view it was crazy. However, they were staying with them overnight and paying them in foreign currency, so they were grateful to them for stopping by. The guy smiled and said that it was a sensible policy. However, if money only revolved within the country, it would bring development to a halt. They needed trade. But in a moment he realized that he hadn't noticed any adventurers here. The girl explained that there were none at the moment, also telling him that about a month ago, a horde of monsters had attacked a border town near Lastwood. As a consequence, an emergency gathering was assembled. All the adventurers gathered and left for the border town. The attack was quite serious, so the situation was quite dire. However, 3 weeks ago Noblewood had declared war on their country. Right after those events, it was a completely inopportune moment. He asked what kind of border town it was, to which the girl said that it was a frontier city built by humans on the border with demon territory. This city was called the Shield of Humanity. Hellion listened to her carefully. In a way, he had expected it. A lot of things weren't even mentioned in the game. The demon race existed in his game as well. But really, Camille, the commander of the 6th Corps, could be called one too. But then again, he had never heard of demon territory. There were still many things he wanted to ask about, but his mind was already a complete mess. He looked around at the people in the area who were coming up for another bowl of soup, and realized that they were pretty well received in this village. As he sipped his herbal infusion, he noticed 2 small children. He asked about the boys who were standing away from them. The boy noticed that one of them had a rather small body and assumed it was a warrior cat. Leifa clarified that she was so small because she is half-halfling. Hellion clarified that there were quite a few races gathered here. It looked like there were a lot of halflings as well. But he was very surprised to see dwarves there, since, in fact, elves and dwarves couldn't stand each other, asking also about the fact that they had things different here. Leifa said with a smile that undoubtedly this country was founded for the most part by half-elves. However, Lastwood was built by the combined efforts of the different races of the time. Those who were weak and had no one to rely on, huddled together in one big pile. As a result, started a new country. The boy explained with a smile that it was an amazing country. He looked proudly at Leifa, who was watching the guys as they helped themselves to the food that Reeve had prepared. Then, while Reeve finished serving the food, he and Leifa talked about all sorts of trivia, telling their stories. In the back of his mind, he feared that she would ask for Reeve and Altina to be provided to her as valuable warriors. To his surprise, she didn't even broach the subject. Topics of conversation were favorite foods, hobbies, the fact that Lila had been spoiled since childhood and had poor manners. They didn't talk about anything of substance at all. When Leifa smiled, even when in such a dire situation, she gave the impression of a true leader. But would he be able to behave the same way when cornered in a similar situation, as he didn't have an ounce of confidence? A girl walked up to Reeve and said that they couldn't allow their guests to clean up, to which she clarified that it was fine and asked that she be the one to provide it. Hellion was momentarily distracted from the conversation and tried to open the virtual chat window. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to contact them outside of the bottomless forest. Thankfully, it looked like that wasn't a problem. Outsiders could not see this virtual window. To them it looked like he was just looking up at the sky. Hellion sent an email saying that they had somehow managed to successfully establish contact with the locals, and asked if everything was normal and unchanged in their kingdom. In a moment, a mug of herbal concoction fell from the guy's hands. A small thump of wood against the stone ground was heard. Many people paid attention to it. Leifa looked at the guy and addressed him as Hellion San. If the happiness level index remains extremely low, then the loyalty level will fall below a certain value. In that case, the likelihood is that a violent rebellion will be raised. In this game, there is a system of subordinate rebellions. The situation in the kingdom of Archimaira was quite tense. Someone was shouting all over the street that they were weaklings, teasing that this was all they were capable of. A certain commander of one of the corps was asking to have some fun before their commander-in-chief arrived. An ally emergency call came through the magic artifact. It was necessary to contact them immediately, and asked for permission a little later to provide an apology for such rudeness on their part. The village was hit by a strong wind that moved the tree crowns. Leifa didn't realize what was happening. The guy in the moment opened a virtual chat window and sent an email about them protecting the throne until he returned. No one was to be allowed to touch it. Reeve barked out a plea to forgive her rudeness. The guy said it didn't matter. She was too adhering to the rules of etiquette. They needed to get back to the castle immediately. They couldn't rely on only capturing the throne. Capturing the throne by the rebels would not result in immediate annihilation. However, plus, with a decrease in happiness and morale, there would be significant restrictions on the king, starting with a virtual window of authority. This could have been fatal for him. Yes, and this time the rebellion broke out not in the local cities, but in the capital of the empire, in addition to the loss of the throne. If certain conditions are met, it will eventually be considered a success of the revolution. Then it would definitely be the end, or rather the end of the entire empire. He couldn't let that happen. A country ruled by the human king would be destroyed, and the data of the character of the corresponding rank would be completely deleted. Revolutionary success, in other words, would mean total defeat. In that case, he wondered what was about himself. What would happen to him at this moment? Would he die? But after all, it was all a dream, and asked someone to confirm that it was definitely a dream. At this moment in the kingdom of Archimaira, there was fighting with orcs that were several times stronger. The commander of the 5th Corps was Bergelmir. His face conveyed a mad smile as he looked at the orc army, calling them an ordinary little thing. Garde began to shout about whether or not anyone could stop him. If they really wanted to tug at him, he might as well call Reeve here as well. Reeve turned to Hellion saying that the castle was already in their sight. He asked Altina to pick up the sound of battle inside the castle. The girl said that the castle was quiet. However, the battle was most likely going on somewhere in the vicinity, but had not reached the castle yet. Hellion asked Reeve to avoid the battlefield and head to the castle first. Once inside the castle grounds, he praised her and ordered her to keep moving towards the throne, to which the girl accepted his orders. The knights at the castle greeted their king. One of the main ones ordered them to part and give him way. The commander shouted that his majesty had arrived, saying that their lord was already in the castle. Hellion shouted out what their situation was at the moment. Hellion was approached by the commander of one of the squads. He repeated that he was asking how they were doing, saying that no one had touched his throne. The commander replied that as soon as they received his orders, they immediately began to defend the throne. They had also gathered an elite squad. Walking to his throne with a speechless silence, he asked what about the other commanders. He began to wonder who was the traitor among all of them. Baron was on their side. If he was the traitor, the throne would have been taken by now. Also, Reeve and Altina showed no signs of committing treachery. However, what about the other commanders? Wasn't there a traitor among them? Some of them have their own characteristic. There were those who had selfishness, pleasure, and arrogance present. On top of that, there were those who by nature tended to be chaotic. For example, Altina's characteristic quality was harmony, something he favored more. It had a positive influence in order to eliminate conflict between subordinates. On the other hand, there was chaos, because of which one could do ridiculous things, neglecting to influence others. Moreover, among the 8 commanders, there was one who had a propensity for evil. To deal with the rebels, the 5th Corps commander acts on his own, leading his own unit and part of the 6th Corps fighting force. The rest of the Corps commanders, however, still continue to follow Hellion's order. The lad gave a surprised look and asked what the rebels' situation was, and who had caused the rebellion. Baron replied that it was a group of ogres, the same group that had surrendered the night before the Foundation Day celebration. They immediately surrendered. Camille asked her comrade what he had done. Using his subordinates, he trashed everything in the neighborhood, to which he asked her to shut up. He explained that he advised her not to think about it, and hoped that these inadequate creatures would not come again. Hellion held his head and exhaled. Baron was immediately alert and asked what was wrong, to which he said he was just a little tired from all the commotion. However, he wondered if his fears were in vain, as he was unable to stand on his feet due to such a shock. If one recalled, the whole way that he was desperately holding on to Reeve to avoid falling, so there was nothing surprising here. Baron turned to Reeve saying that surprisingly she was in a good mood, to which the girl asked what he meant, since he had talked about being in a good mood in the midst of the uprising. But it was not in his nature to speak rashly, to which he only mumbled to her in response. Reeve explained that looking at everything that was going on, how could this even happen? The suppression of the rebellion was complete. Hellion ordered to go inspect the condition of the entire city. However, the presence of the ogres there meant that the intention to quell the rebellion as a result of the Foundation Day celebration had been interrupted. By the way, if the king is absent while the country is quiet, even the foolish ogres may have time to rebel. Hellion walked through the streets where the massacre was. This horrifying picture was too realistic. Here there was no control of censorship by the ethnic code that was supposed to be present in the game. The commander of the 5th Corps greeted his king Hellion, saying that the rebellion had been put down. Guy explained that the man had done his job well. Garde denied it and asked not to say so, as he was ready to suffer any punishment. From the beginning he could not imagine the appearance of a rebellion. Hellion said not to worry so much as they had defended the city well. He asked where the leader of the rebellion was, to which the commander pointed out to him with his hand where he supposedly lay. He realized that it was simply unbearable to look him in the face, though in a way, he wished for that result himself. It was unacceptable to avert his gaze. Reeve turned to Garde saying that she had turned a blind eye to all this for a long time. But his manner of speech to the Lord was not getting any better, to which he looked at her guiltily, saying that she was starting the same thing again. He pointed at Hellion and said that who but their commander forgives his manner of speech, even in this situation. Reeve said there was a limit to everything. Moreover, in front of his soldiers he had to maintain at least a modicum of decorum. Garde shouted that this was where the corpses would be processed and disposed of, and asked permission so he could go. Reeve started yelling that she wasn't done with her conversation with him yet. Eltina watched from the sidelines and told them not to fight, to which Hellion also made a remark to both of them to stop fooling around. At the moment something came crashing down on the guy. In the game, the weakest being in the game was the king. Hence, he did not possess the techniques necessary to avoid a close-range attack. Death was confirmed at the moment of the surprise attack. He couldn't understand why exactly it happened. He began to deny the fact that he was about to die, muttering that he was not alive. He repeated the phrase that he was dying. He didn't want this and asked for someone to help him. The weakest King Hellion was betrayed by the people of his own country. He was dreaming and a vague realization came to him that it could have all been an ordinary dream. It was as if the enemy army was still in pursuit. And that army was vast, from elves and dwarves to demons, devils, fairies, and magical beasts. And the very last were a herd of dragons of an amorphous non-human race that looked like slime and ghosts. All sorts of races were gathered in one place, and it was a mixed core of different races that he vaguely recalled. However, on the other side were the soldiers under command, not many of them. 3 figures for 8 places, and 2 of them had already been destroyed. The only thing left in his hands was a beautifully crafted figure of a wolf. In other words, that was his entire strength. There was no chance of victory. For Tsukasa Misaki, this game was a fairy tale world, more like a dream. That was why, while seeking romance and teaching his close friends, he continued to pursue his ideals. As a result of further progress became, briefly speaking, the end point of his dream, which was completely compressed and it was impossible to go back from there. No matter how strong the final main figure was, it would still be mercilessly destroyed with a combat power difference of 100,000 against 1. Even he, determined to destroy other cities, he had been weaving a history of 150 years, thinking that one day it would be his turn as well. Now that that moment had come, however, without flaunting his clumsiness, he was ready for the final finale. But he was also still scared. It was frightening as hell. He had actually witnessed this terrifying finale. The emotions were just tearing him apart. But this wasn't at all what was promised. The miniature garden that Tsukasa Misaki loved didn't have such a horrible reality. It was supposed to be a world of dreams and fantasies, and the game itself was supposed to be fun. However, one could look up and see something. In front of him stood a huge ogre with a bloody deadly weapon that shattered skulls. Hellion screamed across the room and jumped up on the bed. Reeve was sitting next to him. The guy was in shock and didn't understand what was going on, knowing the fact that he had been killed. However, he was alive. In the moment he looked around the room he was in. With a confused look he pronounced that he was in the king's bedroom. Reeve looked at him with incomprehension. The girl turned to him with tears in her eyes. Hellion didn't realize what was happening. Reeve took hold of his head and said that he had finally woken up, pouring tears into his eyes. The boy realized in bewilderment that it was all some kind of dream and didn't understand how or what was going on here. He was sure that he was on his way to the place where the rebellion had been suppressed, but he remembered the ogre that had attacked him. However, the guy didn't understand what had happened, since he had just recently been killed. Reeve explained that those same ogres, something strange was happening to the rebels, and asked him to remain calm. He shouldn't have gotten out of bed right now, as he had slept for over half the day. He wondered what the madness was, as he didn't remember falling asleep at all. Hellion began to deny it, and speculated that could it mean that it wasn't a dream at all. It was most likely his own memories. The boy turned to Reeve with a question about the fact that it was the very same red ogre that had killed him, to which the girl nodded back at him, confirming his question. He covered his face with his hands and assumed it was the automatic revival that had triggered it. In this game, the death of a king does not immediately end the game. A king can be resurrected if he was killed, but the limit of those actions is limited. In other words, Hellion was killed once and then resurrected. Guy turned to the girl and asked if his throne was safe, and clarified what had become of the rebels and that red ogre. Reeve explained not to worry. The throne was perfectly safe. At the moment, the 2nd Corps elite under Baron's command had reinforced their defenses. The rebels this time, every single one of them had been wiped out. And also, as for the precursor, he seemed to be the possessor of unique abilities. Hellion opened the virtual menu in front of him. He began to read into the skills and abilities of this ogre. He deducted that the final blow was his ability to counterattack only once after death. Controlling the dead man's own body was a success. Garde, the commander of the 5th Corps, was adamant that he had destroyed all the rebels. Therefore, Reeve and Eltina were wary. However, next to the ogre that had unique abilities was Hellion. He behaved carelessly as he approached him. The girl knelt in front of him and said that she was sorry, but even though she was supposed to protect him, such carelessness was unforgivable, and there was no excuse for the situation. Reeve shouted that she was willing to accept any punishment and asked to be punished. Hellion looked at her in surprise. He raised his hand and asked her to come closer to him. The girl stood up and took a step forward, to which Hellion asked her to come even closer and sit on his bed. The girl obediently walked over and sat down next to him. In a moment, the guy's hand slid through her hair, bringing tears to her eyes. Running his hand down to her neck, his heart began to pound with a high rhythm. He moved closer to her face. Her heart started to feel like it was jumping out of him. So did Reeve herself. Her cheeks were flushed, her scent was faint, her hair seemed quite soft to the touch. The sounds of her heartbeat were increased, and he also wiped her tears and tasted them, and realized that the taste of the tears was slightly salty. Reeve was shocked by this and couldn't utter a word, her expression telling him that there was no impending threat. There was no pack of monsters surrounding the throne. All the leaders of the 8 Corps were alive and well, and the country was safe. What he had seen earlier was just a dream. However, what was happening right now was clearly not a dream.